The Ulster Earls are gone, but the people are still Gaelic, still Catholic. In English minds, Ulster is dangerously unstable.
And it's here that a new king will attempt a radical solution. Social engineering on a massive scale.
King James I would plant thousands of Protestant settlers on the lands of the exiled Gaelic lords. The land was parcelled out in blocks of up to 2,000 acres. By the time 6 counties were colonised, only 1/4 of the land of Ulster remained in Irish hands. The town the planters called Londonderry was to become a Protestant citadel. These planters lived in an age of expansion. English ships also carried settlers to America. And here in Derry, on the banks of the River Foyle, they would forge a Protestant identity different from anything seen in Ireland before. These were not land-grabbing aristocrats, but small traders and farmers, and they had come to stay.
It was about establishing something identifiably British. It was about setting up bonds, defended dwellings, bringing the number of planters in, setting up market towns, road networks, modernising and making it clearly identifiable as a place that was part of England and Scotland.
To help pay for the plantation, James turned to the commercial guilds of the City of London. These companies already backed settlements in America. To the tailors, butchers, drapers, goldsmiths being asked to go to dangerous Ulster, plantation was sold as a commercial opportunity. This book of maps from 1622 shows how the settlements took shape. This is a piece of cartography from long ago, but it's, you know, as anybody who has lived in Northern Ireland during the period of the Troubles, to actually see this, in a sense, the beginning of it all.
Yes.
It's quite awe-inspiring.
It really is. It brings you right back to the heart of it, and you see really what was the genesis of an awful lot of the issues in Northern Ireland.
Of course, we can see when we look on the pages here, where they run through the number of people who are, for example, freeholders on this territory, 1. Englishmen on this property, 16. Natives, 186. That's the mathematics of disaster, isn't it?
In a sense it is.
That sense of insecurity is part of, and continues to be a part of, the Protestant psyche for a very long time. Originally, part of the idea had been to segregate, this will be the British population and the Irish will be kept apart. But that, of course, proved actually almost impossible, because no matter how hard the London companies might try to attract somebody in London, it wasn't something that was very attractive. So the whole problem was getting the numbers of people and settlers here on the ground in order to actually secure plantation.
But from across the narrow channel between Ireland and Scotland came thousands of settlers who would rescue the plantation. There'd been a long tradition of Scots migration to Ulster, but these were Presbyterians, strict Calvinists, viscerally opposed to Roman Catholicism.
These are people who have been victims of religious persecution in 17th century Scotland. They certainly see themselves as a chosen people or an elect nation. Their world consists of trials and tribulations and deliverances, and that means that they're tested by God. In Ireland, of course, they're tested by God in the form of the threat posed by the Catholic population.
The Reformation had created the most enduring division in Irish history. These Presbyterians would never be assimilated into Gaelic society like earlier settlers in Ireland. From the early 18th century, restrictions on Catholics had been strengthened under the so-called penal laws, a charter for the defence of Protestant power. In Ulster, Presbyterians were also victims of the penal laws.
There, Calvinism was condemned by the established Anglican Church. And like Catholics, they were forced to pay for the upkeep of Anglican ministers. Discrimination prompted many to look beyond Irish shores. Ireland was now part of a rapidly expanding British Empire, and that colonial expansion offered space for those wanting to escape poverty and persecution. At Belfast docks and the other Ulster ports begins one of the great themes of the story of Ireland: emigration. We're used to the idea of Irish emigration to the United States being a Catholic phenomenon. But the first people to come here in any sizable numbers were Ulster Presbyterians. Between 1717 and 1776, more than 250,000 of them crossed the Atlantic to the New World. From the port of Philadelphia, they travelled hundreds of miles west and south along an old Indian trail that became known as the Great Wagon Road. Many came to the frontiers of the new America, Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. This is the oldest Presbyterian church still standing in Virginia. Founded in 1740, many of the congregation can trace their ancestry back to the first wave of Ulster Scots who settled in this area. What kind of character do they bring to this place?
Oh, I think they were a very sturdy, independent people. They had already made a transition from one country to another when they moved from Scotland to Ireland, and so they were perfectly willing to cross an ocean. It takes a certain amount of endurance, of courage, of faith, of forward-looking. They're good qualities for pioneers to have.
Some of these Ulster Scots settlers become what are known as the hillbillies. They head for the mountains.
Well, the people that came to be known as hillbillies were the people who lived somewhat on the fringe of the Scotch-Irish community, who moved up into the hills and the hollers in more remote areas. They got a reputation for being kind of a lawless bunch who were outside the mainstream. They were often associated with moonshine.
The Ulster Presbyterians had arrived in a dynamic environment. The borders of America were continually expanding. There was also a growing sense that Americans should govern themselves and not be beholden to a foreign king. In 1775, Americans rebelled against the rule of King George III. The Ulster Presbyterians joined the American War of Independence. To what extent was freedom of religious expression a crucial part of their decision to join the revolution?
I think it was an important contributing factor. The whole opportunity that the Constitution offered with the Bill of Rights to have freedom of religion was something they wholeheartedly supported.
In 1780, Ulster Scots militiamen played an important role on the American side in a famous victory. At the Battle of King's Mountain, they helped to defeat a larger force loyal to the Crown. An eyewitness account of the battle was published in the Belfast newsletter. It also printed personal letters from relatives in America. In one such letter, a young woman writes, "You will undoubtedly laugh at me when I assure you I often wish to be a man. With what pleasure would I take up arms with my brave countrymen, and like them glory in fighting for my liberty." By 1783, the American revolutionaries had finally defeated the British and won independence.